Welcome to SuperHero Conversations, a podcast saga with business innovation leaders who will be at SuperNova, the #1 tech innovation event in Benelux, happening in the end of March 2025. I'm your host, Dominic Dietschuk, and joining me today is the founder of SuperNova, the driving force behind Smartfin, one of the biggest VC funds in Belgium. Hello, Jürgen Ingels.
Hi, how are you?
I'm really good. Jürgen, I would begin with a question. SuperNova is less than 5 weeks away. If we would have a teleport machine and it's 29th of March and SuperNova is finished, what are the key aspects, what are the results that you would say the SuperNova would be successful?
Yeah, I would first say inspiration, because one of the aims is really to put really inspirational people that you don't see in Flanders on stage. So we have a lot of international people. So that will be the first one. The second one, which is the most important one, I think, and also the reason for SuperNova, is also the fact that we have a lot of international investors coming over, about 200, and that we actually can also showcase that Belgium and Flemish companies are not just companies like any companies, but we are special. And the whole idea of SuperNova is really to connect investors with entrepreneurs, but also to inspire people. And so it's not just for people who want to raise capital or who want to get in touch with VCs. It's really for people who want to know how the world is going to evolve on technology, how inspirational stuff can be, and so on. So that's the aim. So inspire people and make connections and also make sure that people and companies get money to grow.
When I ask people about SuperNova, the first thing that comes up to mind is these are the crazy guys that invited Barack Obama to Belgium. And now this year, Oprah Winfrey is coming to as a keynote speaker. My question is why and how? Why do you do it? And how do you manage to book them?
Yeah, I mean, why is basically... I would like to aim high. And so I just want to show, because sometimes in Belgium we have the expression, oh, it can't be done, it's too difficult, blah, blah, blah. And I just want to prove that even in Belgium we can get stuff done. So that's the first aim. The second aim is basically Oprah and also President Obama came on Sunday. And that's an event where we actually have some sponsorships, where it's easier to get sponsorships. And so we make a profit on the Sunday. But that profit on the Sunday we use to pay for the costs on Thursday, Friday, because organizing SuperNova and inviting all of these investors and the international stage that we built and the speakers and all of that, I mean, it costs a lot of money. And so we're not operationally break even on Thursday, Friday, but we use the money on Sunday to overall be break even. And so the aim for me is to do something meaningful, to have impact that has impact in Flanders, but then do it in a sound way financially. We're not there yet completely, but I hope in the next years that we will be able to not only do break even, but that make a small profit so that we can also grow the SuperNova, because the aim really for me is to build something international and hopefully go to 10, 20,000 people. That's the aim. But you have to have some ambition, obviously.
This year's theme is Shoot for the Moon. And as I know, you're wearing a NASA sweatshirt. And as I know, you're a huge fan of space. You've just returned from the US visiting SpaceX.
Yes.
First question, why do you find space so fascinating? Why do you feel it's important? And maybe you could share some insights that you got from visiting SpaceX.
I think philosophical. I think, are we alone? Why are we here? What's the purpose? How did the universe start? All of that. I mean, that's philosophical. But I think it's really fascinating if you really think about how big the universe is and so on. So that's one angle. The second angle is more on the technology side. If you look at what kind of technologies that came out, basically out of space, it's huge. And people don't necessarily realize it. But going from Zoom, for instance, that came out, that was invented in space, to my watch, where we don't have scratches on the glass anymore. The glass comes out of space. So there's a huge amount of stuff that comes out of space. And now Musk says, okay, we want to go to Mars. And it's a lot of technical challenges still, but it means that we're going to try to overcome these challenges. And by overcoming these challenges, or by doing R&D and trying to investigate all the stuff, there's a whole heap of new things that will emerge. And so that's why I'm really personally interested in space, because it pushes technology, it pushes the edge of technology on one hand, and it also looks into my more philosophical questions. So the angle of both is I found really fascinating.
Yeah. And maybe you could share, what have you seen when visiting SpaceX?
Yeah, it was really, really fascinating because we were invited by NASA, so to go really behind the scenes. So we were able to go in the white building that NASA has, where they basically build their rockets. And so they were building the Artemis 2, which is a rocket that will go to the moon again, hopefully. But it's fascinating to see. We went up 16 stories and talked with engineers, talked with astronauts, what they're doing. And then, very interesting, we went to SpaceX, to the factory of SpaceX, which is completely different. It's a completely different mindset. The NASA builds their rockets high up. The booster rockets that come back from Falcon 9, they basically, restore them and then reuse them. But rather than putting them up, they actually lie them down. And they have engineers working inside of it. But obviously, if you work inside of it, it's difficult if you want to hit the ceiling of the rocket if you stand inside. And so they actually have a system where they actually turn it around, which is, so the nice thing is, if you look into the factory of Musk, what I found was that it's tech, obviously, it's technology, but it's much common sense. He uses a huge amount of common sense. If you walk around in the factory, you see a lot of common sense. So it's really something that has been thought about. I'm not saying that NASA didn't use common sense, but I found the conflict between the two quite fascinating, and it's interesting to see. And obviously, we did some cool stuff. We went to the place where they are working on food for Mars and NASA. We went to the landing place of the Challenger. It's like huge stuff. We went where the astronauts basically came out from Apollo and then Gemini and so on, where they came out from the space shuttle. The door, so the historical door where they come out, we did the same thing. And we talked with a lot of astronauts. It was really, really fascinating and also interesting to learn about technology and what kind of technologies are being. So it's really something I think every entrepreneur should have, or any person who's really interested should have the opportunity to do that, because it's fascinating.
We are sitting at a bar right now. The office you had with Clear to Pay, the central point was a bar,
Yes.
huge bar.
Yes.
In the middle of SuperNova, there will be a bar, I don't know how many meters
60
long,
meters.
with free drinks. Could you share a philosophy on why do you think that the best deals are done with a pint?
Yeah, I think we're probably the only event where you have a bar like this big, and it's not because we're alcoholics or something, or because it's a bar. It has fruit, it has coffee, it has obviously some alcohol, it has champagne, it has all kind of stuff, whiskey, tasting, you name it, it has it. But the whole idea behind it is that my experience is that if you have people that are in conflict sometimes, but you put them together in a bar and they drink a beer and so on, that the conversation goes well and better, and also inside a company. So I used to do that within my company because I saw that salespeople didn't really talk with engineers, and the engineers said these sales guys, they can't sell, and the sales guy said the stuff that these engineers are making, I can't sell it because it's crap, it's rubbish. And so by putting them together on Friday evening at the same bar, they start talking with each other, and so the silos in the company are being broken and torn down. And so it's the same philosophy in SuperNova. The whole idea is to connect with people. You meet people. There's an app where you can actually do some meetings through the app, but you can also just grab people and say, hey, who are you? What are you doing? That could be a VC, it could be an investor, it could be a sales guy, it could be a startup, it could be the CEO of a large company. We have like a mix of people that are really interesting to get inspired. And that's the whole idea. The idea is to inspire, to network, to connect, and to obviously, while you're doing that, to learn also about speakers. So you can choose to go to speakers and get inspired whole day, or you can just say, no, I just want to connect with people, or I want to do a mix of the two.
And what would be your advice for people coming to SuperNova? What's, for example, investors, startuppers, and public officials or business innovation leaders? What is your advice? What's the mindset that I should come with SuperNova?
I think you should have an open mind, because people think sometimes, it's a technology festival, it's about technology. It is obviously technology, but it goes very, very broad. It talks about health, it talks about the future, it talks about AI, it talks about all the kind of stuff about developing cars, for instance. We have an astronaut who comes and talks. So it's much broader than purely technology. So if you just sit there for 2 days in the room and you listen to the people, you get inspired. That's one hand. So openness. I would also say the way that you prepare it, because you can prepare meetings through the app. So you just look at all people who are there. It's very flexible. You can say, hey, I want to meet this guy. I want to meet this guy. There are 200 VCs. So if you're a company and you want to raise capital in the next, let's say, 18 months, it's the perfect place to be, because you don't have to go to London and Paris and the US, and a lot of them are there. So if you're there 2 days, you open mind, you just talk with people, try to meet as much people as possible, try to speak, what are you doing? How can I help you? How can you basically get some advice from experienced people? That's the place to be, basically.
You're also an author. You have a really nice book called Start, Grow, Sell. How is it called in Dutch?
50 Lessons for Entrepreneurs. But it's not really lessons, it's more experiences, what I experienced.
I read this book and I find it fascinating because I'm a starting entrepreneur, but I feel that if I was in my already a unicorn era or a corporate era where I'm a CEO of a big company, I would still find this book extremely useful. So could you tell me what is the concept behind this book and who should read it?
The concept was easy. I have 2 children, a daughter and a son. And both of them are not really entrepreneurial. I mean, I'm saying they're not entrepreneurial, but they're not really truly entrepreneurial. My son is studying geography in Leuven University. My daughter is now the first year in marketing, also in Leuven. So they're not that entrepreneurial. And I wrote the book basically for them because they've seen me, obviously. They know that I work hard, but they don't really know what I'm doing. So I thought, well, maybe writing a book and also give them like some headlines, if they ever want to become an entrepreneur, that you can say, hey, before you start being an entrepreneur, just read the book of your father, just to help you a bit. And that's the reason why I wrote it. So I wrote it myself, didn't use any ghostwriter or whatsoever. And it was fun doing. It was a lot of work, but it was fun doing. And so that was the reason why I started it. And then what I see today, which is very nice, there's a lot of young people that want to start or founders or whatever who really refer to the book. And the book is really like being given from one entrepreneur to the other. You should read this book. It's also now starting internationally, doing quite good. But I kind of like the fact that people read it and that I can help them with the experience that I have, with the mistakes I've made, because I also made stupid mistakes. But I'm very open in the book about, okay, what I've learned, what went well, what went wrong. And I hope with this book, that was the intent, to really help people to save time so that they don't have to go through the same hustle or the same challenges or the same problems that I had. So that's the reason. And it works well. I mean, the book it's fun to see, because if I go to a shop or something and I do grocery shop, there are people who just stop me and say, hey, I read your book. I have 3 questions. Can I ask you questions? So it's fun. It's nice.
And you actually mention how you started with parties and how you did this, but in the end you actually mention huge things like mergers and acquisitions, and give actual practical advice on how to go through this kind of pathway. So I do believe that it's extremely interesting, that it's for a whole diverse group of people. I also have a few questions about this book.
Okay.
So I would be the person that stopped you in the grocery store and ask you.
Okay.
So in one of the chapters, you write that you should choose something that you love, really, really love, and concentrate on it and develop and become the best in the world. I don't hold the monopoly on truth here, but I have a counter argument that in today's ultra specialized world, you need to be an expert of high level. And it's more important to be a generalist, to be more good at different things, to have a broad view, and to understand how to draw parallels between different industries and develop more on the softer skills. Please disagree with me.
Well, I do agree. And in fact, in the book, I don't know if you've read it, but there's also a chapter on serial and parallel working. And I'm a big fan of parallel working, meaning that you work in a sector, but then while you're doing that, you're also get some like ideas from other sectors, and you apply those ideas into your own sector, which means that you have an advantage over the people who don't do that. And so you're always, if you start parallel working in the beginning of your career, you're always going to have an advantage. So I'm very much for that. On the other hand, I do think, and that's my personal opinion, I think that technology companies, and I see that in technology, the way companies are structured is changing. Before you had You started with your ID, you had a sales, pre-sales, you had HR, finance, blah, 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 and you had 100 people. Took you 10 years to get to 100 million or 10 million, 100 million is maybe a bit exaggerated, but 10 million euro. And so that there was a certain pattern. What I see now today is that people basically say, like Musk is saying, I'm going to go to Mars. He puts like something out there that's a kind of North Star. This is my North Star. I'm going to go to Mars, which is very challenging. But still, he puts that. And same with technology guys. They say, I want to solve a problem, a big problem. I want to solve it. And the guy starts, the founder, and then he surrounds himself with like 5 to 10 people, but really, really clever people. The top at what they are, in developing and sales and whatever, but the top guys. And these guys are really focused on the product, and they're really focused also on the customer. If a customer asks a question, they involve and they move. But the nice thing is that their whole back office infrastructure, finance, HR, CRM, and so on, it's all automated. So they don't have any overhead almost. They don't have fancy offices because they sit somewhere in a small office. They don't do marketing really because they don't have a website even necessarily, because their product is so good that it's like, it sells automatically. It almost viral. And so what you see is that you have these companies now that are getting to 10 million in 3 years with a 70% profitability, and they're only 10 or 15 guys. And so the way the world is changing, I don't believe that in the future, in 5 to 10 years, we will not see companies of 1,000 or 2,000 people in technology anymore, because you don't need that kind of people anymore, but you need very bright people, and all the rest is going to be automated. And it's starting already. It's not just something that in a dream. I see today companies in Europe and US and Asia within that model. Now that model starts in tech, and it's gonna go across other industries. And so my view is that if you're gonna be average, you're not gonna be good enough anymore, because if you're average, you're not gonna be within those 15 guys. You're not gonna be part of those 15 guys. And so my advice would be, find out what you're good at. Everybody's good at something. Everybody has a talent. But don't waste your time trying to improve on the stuff that you're not good at. Try to put all your effort in your talent and improve on your talent so that you can become the best in the world. And then work with others who are also in their field the best in the world, and create the best in the world company.
We see these examples like, for example, Telegram is one of the biggest chats messengers in the world. They have only like 30 people or something. My question is that, for example, Apple could have started like in a garage with a few guys, but it seems that the world becomes more like deep techish. You know, you cannot. It's getting more complicated to start a company with a few software engineers and an idea to make not an average company, but to make a real, unicorn. To make a company that makes a biggest impact. So the kind of the level of the knowledge that you have to insert is getting much higher, and the amount of money that you need to insert.
I don't necessarily agree. I would say knowledge, I would say creativity. And that's the nice thing about living in this era. I mean, before you needed to have like money, or you need to have connections with your dad and your mother, and to be able to be an entrepreneur, you had to have money and connections and so on. Today, you just need creativity. You can change the world with 10 people, even yourself, if you have a great idea. And what happened in AI very recently is a proof. Everybody talks about, AI is going to conquer, and these big companies are going to conquer the world. And then in China, there's a small company with 20 or 30 engineers that come up with a new creative way, whatever, to think about it. So I'm a big fan of creativity, because ultimately creativity will always win. And I'm pretty sure, even if you have big companies like Google, Apple, and so on, one day there's going to be a very smart guy who's going to be sitting there somewhere and is going to come up with a revolutionary idea, and he's going to blast some of these companies away. So I'm a really big fan of that. Maybe a bit naive, but I do believe in that.
To continue to that with that topic, I would like to read a quote from the book. It's from Steve Jobs, but you also have it. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things, they push the human race forward, and while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the ones who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who actually do. Where do you see those rebels thrive the most? And are you one?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm one, but if I just look at what the people in my neighborhood says to me, wife, children, and so on, a lot of people say that I'm crazy, and I'm probably crazy, but I'm crazy in a good way, in the sense that I really would like to. I always try to push boundaries, and I see that sometimes if I go on holiday, after 2 days, I'm already getting bored, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what can I do here? Is there something you can import, export, whatever? And so, yes, I'm from that perspective, I'm a bit different. I also think that the choices that I've made in my study, because I've studied 2 years of engineer, then I did political social sciences, I did an MBA. So the connection of like finance, sociology, psychology, philosophy, and also pure tech on the basis is a good combination for what I do as a private equity guy. But on the other hand, I also think life is very short. People don't realize, but life is short. You live like maybe 70, 75 years. First 10 years, not great, but not conscious. Last 10 years, maybe not conscious either. So 50 years, 200, 300 days, it's not that much days. So that's also why I'm actually a very positive person. I sometimes have my problems that I'm also a bit depressed from time to time, like everybody. But overall, I'm a very optimistic person. And I want to just push things. And the whole idea from me is that if I ever die, which is a fact, I hope that when I would look back at my life, that I say, okay, I've done some fun stuff and I've pushed a little stone a bit further down the track to really also advance some of the things. Obviously, I'm in Belgium. Belgium is a small country. I don't live in the US. So I mean, from a Belgian perspective, it's more difficult to do that. But I'm still very happy at what I do, and I think we need more rebels. We need more guys who say, think out of the box and do crazy stuff, because that's how you push things forward.
In your book, you also say that rebels are essential parts of a company, and they often make things difficult. They question everything, but they are the ones who inject creativity and challenge the other employees. Correct. To drive the change.
Yeah.
What is your advice for companies to attract those rebels, to be a magnet for those rebels?
Yeah, I mean, it's changing, luckily, because I think if you would go back, when I started my career in the bank, and I worked in a financial institution in the bank, I was considered to be a strange guy, really strange guy. So they looked at me a bit like, And in that point in time, they probably didn't really realize that I was more entrepreneurial, and they should have kept me in a way. But they didn't really do that nicely, because at that point in time, I was a bit out of the ordinary, a bit special. And people don't like special guys. And so, which is funny, because today, if you look at banking today, they kind of look for these rebels. They want them because these are the guys who actually push and put the things upside down. So in my book also, I show what kind of people there are. And there are people who always nag. There are people who are opportunistic, they're conformists, and then the passionate people, then the rebels, and so on. And so you almost need from each one a bit of, but not too many that are non-passionate or non-rebel, because then you get into trouble. If you have too much people who are negative, then it doesn't move the needle. And so having some of them is great, but you can't have all rebels, because if you only have rebels, sometimes in the beginning, if you start your company, you need to have a bit of chaos. And so 1 or 2 rebels is important. But if you start organizing your company because you're at 100 to 150 people, you have to have some rules regularly. Then a rebel is sometimes interesting, but not too many, because then it doesn't work either. So you have to be careful at who you place where. But you definitely need them.
I want to tell you 2 stories. The first one is that on a conference in November, a young man came up to you and asked whether he could help you with SuperNova. And fast forward a few months, the same young man is sitting in front of you doing podcasts for SuperNova.
Yeah.
The second story is that in 2009, when you were building your new office for Clear to Pay, instead of choosing a reliable architectural firm with a diverse portfolio, you gave this job to 2 young architects who had barely something to show, but they gave you such a creative design that you decided to go with them. Why do you choose to give opportunity to young people that bring more risk to the table?
Yeah, maybe because when I was young at the bank, I also got the opportunity to do some cool stuff. So I was very young, and the bank gave me like the trust and said, "Okay, go ahead and do stuff." So I think giving opportunity to young people is really important. I still have the example. The lawyer who worked with me, Anneleen van der Elstraat, she worked with me when she was very young. She just came out of university. We were negotiating really big deals with Federal Reserve Bank and with big banks. And she was our lawyer. She was very, very young, but very, very bright. And then ultimately she set up, I pushed her to set up her own law firm. And today, I mean, the firm is like, it's a big law firm, 4 and 5, who basically does a lot of the deals in Belgium. And very similar with David Dessers, who's also a lawyer who worked with me. I also pushed him to set up his own office. And so I kind of like helping young people, giving them opportunity. But on the other hand, I'm also, I mean, people who work with me say I'm a nice guy, but I demand a lot. I'm very demand, but I'm also very demanding for myself. So, but I think if you have good people, they're creative. It doesn't really matter if they are older or younger or age. I kind of like give opportunities to people. And look at you, here you are, exactly. So
we see an drastic change. We are living in interesting times, as you mentioned, and we have this 2 huge superpowers, US and China, right now competing against each other in a technological war, more specifically in an AI war. I wouldn't call it a war, but I would say that it's a competition, because I do believe that change and innovation is more positive, as you mentioned also. But sadly, we don't see Europe on the chessboard. We don't see Europe mentioning, of course we have some really nice players in France, UK, maybe Estonia, Belgium, but it's on a global scale, it's quite small. Maybe you could give an advice to each to each player of the startup ecosystem, meaning governments, meaning investors, meaning founders. What is your advice? How could we, the European people, bring Europe to the next global scale?
Yeah. Well, I think there's one thing that is clear that has been spoken about, is that the European regulation is pretty hefty. And Europe first thinks about something and then they say, let's regulate. And then once it's regulated, then they start. While in the States, they have a more mentality of, okay, let's try it. And if something goes wrong, then we'll regulate it. And so the fact is that pushes much faster advancement. So I would say Europe needs to bring down the regulation. I think now, today, they're starting to realize that. So that's good. I also think on ESG side, and I'm a big fan of ESG, don't get me wrong, but I also think that it has been too extreme on one end. You have to have a business, you have to take into account ESG, but it cannot be about ESG and then the second part, the business. The business has always come to come at the first place. And so I also think that the ESG wave in Europe has been a bit too much on the extreme. So it has to be pushed back a bit in the middle. So those are 2 things I would say from a government perspective that is needed. I'm not too negative, actually, because as I explained before, that the world of how technology companies are built is changing, creativity, but also brightness. And 2 things we have in Europe, which is something I think that cannot be discussed, is the fact that we are very creative, that we have creative people here, historically as well. And so from that perspective, creativity is great. We lacked the capital in before, but capital will not be the most important part anymore, because you will need less capital to build a technology company. And so I'm not too negative, because creativity and the quality of our engineers in Europe is really high. So if you take creativity, quality of engineers, and the fact that you need less money in the future, it's probably going to be a good step up for Europe to actually also build these kind of new tech companies that have limited people, but that also can conquer the world. We do have, I think, a disadvantage that our market is still a very different languages, different regulations, and not really one Europe. I think they have to work on that, because in the US, it's one market. And from an investor's perspective, I would say that in the last 5 years, a lot has changed. If you look now at VCs coming over to Belgium, Belgium was always a flyover zone. VCs, they took the plane to Berlin and to Amsterdam and France and Paris, and they didn't go to Belgium. But today, I mean, they come here. And so that's also a big advance where they realize, okay, valuations are still lower than in the US. Quality of engineers, very high. Cost of living, not too bad in Belgium compared with London, for instance, or with other regions in the world. So we have a lot of ingredients to build great companies. We just have to do it. And we have to stop saying that it cannot be done. It can be done.
You also just raised a huge round. And you have a really interesting, diverse limited partners in Smartfin. Could you tell me about the mood in the kind of the private equity, the venture capital in Europe? Because we saw that, everybody knows that it's much harder to raise now, but it's only on the VC side. How hard is it to raise for the funds from limited partners?
It was difficult. I mean, I have to admit, it was a lot more difficult than our other capital increases. But that's, in a way, it's logic. Because what you've seen in Europe is that in the last 3-4 years, funds have raised capital. And then what they've done is they've pushed that money very, very quickly into companies. But they've pushed it into companies at very high valuations. And so that's not too bad in a way if the companies keep growing and if you can actually sustain that valuation. But what you've seen in the last years that it has been pretty tough also on the economical side. And so the valuations that they stepped in, the multiples where they were very high, 10 times ARR, 10 times recurring revenue, have dropped maybe now to 5-6 times. But that means even if the company has doubled in revenue, that you're still at the same value. And so you have all these funds that raised capital, that invested 4 or 5 years ago. And if you look at it today, the value is still the same like they had 5 years ago. But on the other hand, investors that invested in them are saying, hey, where's my money? When do I get money back? And so what you see is that they try now to get some money out by selling not the greatest companies, but they actually sell them with a loss, which is not very great for the fund. And so I think there's going to be some funds that are going to get into trouble because the valuation that they're invested in, they're never going to achieve it. On one hand, plus a lot of investors that typically invest in funds, they are waiting for money to come back because, well, they suspected money to come back every year or every 2 years, but now it's taken them 3-4 years before money comes back. So they get calls, they have to put money in the funds, but they don't get any return. And so they're very much more hesitant now to just invest in new funds. And so that was something I think that we saw. On the other hand, it's not an easy job because people say, oh, private equity, just taking money and then putting it in a company, getting shares, and then you sell the shares afterwards and that's it. It's way more complex than that. It's a complex job. It's not easy, but it's a lot of fun.
You would say that we are in the first kind of quarter of 2025. Maybe you could kind of make predictions. I know it's hard, but maybe you could give some advice for the founders struggling right now to raise capital. What would you be? What would you do if you were them?
Yeah, I think what you see is a kind of shift between before it was like grow, grow, grow. Doesn't really matter if your bottom line was bad, just grow. And what you see now, it's like the opposite. It's like, oh, grow. It's not that important. It is important, but it's not that important anymore. It's bottom line. And just make sure that you can conserve as much cash as possible and that you get too close to break even as possible. And so what you see is like this struggle in a way between growth on one hand and profitability on the other hand. Now, the best companies in the world are the ones who can do both, who grow at 30% with a profitability at 15% or 20% EBITDA. And so rule of 40, if you combine the 30% EBITDA plus the 20% growth, that's 50, for instance. So that's good. But what you see is that it's only the 1% of those technology companies that can really achieve these kind of metrics. Most of them are like in between, and they have to be careful because if they grow too much, it hits their working capital and then their profitability because they have to invest in growth to hire people and so on, and it hits their EBITDA. And on the other hand, if you say, I'm going to focus on my EBITDA and get my costs under control, then you grow less because you don't have like marketing dollars and so on to spend. And so it's a very difficult and very important balance to not do one too much or the other too much. And so what you see now, companies today are like trying to get kind of equilibrium. But the fact of the matter is that if you look at the valuations today, they're a lot lower. And so it's much more difficult to raise capital, even if you've grown. And then there's anti-dilution provisions in contracts. And so if you do a down round, which is possible, then you see that the impact might be very high, because then you have to give shares away again to the investors from your earlier rounds. And so that whole mix of you need capital, but you can't really go after it because your valuation, the last round was too high and you're going to do a down round and you don't want to do that, versus I need to grow because it's only when I grow that I can increase my value because the multiples are down. That's the interesting challenge in the markets today.
We also mention it in the book that if you can, don't take extra money from VCs, and you mentioned that you can actually bootstrap a lot. What are your recommendations maybe on startups that can bootstrap?
Yeah, well, first, my experience is if there's too much money on the account, for some reason people spend it. And so if you don't have it, then you can't really spend it. I'm not saying you have to not have any money at all, but my experience is really too much money for a company is not good, because it kills creativity. Then you become lazy, and it's easy just to take the money from the account and spend it. So I would say having less money is probably better, because it improves on the creativity. And then you start thinking about, okay, how am I going to solve these problems here? What am I going to do? And so on. Plus, what I also see is that we live in a time now that you can outsource on one hand, but also increase efficiency by using technology in a very, very, very big manner. And I'm always very surprised that I see companies, even in the growth style, that they just hire people. And then because I think, okay, I need to have more people because it's great, because I'm more people, I'm more important, blah, blah, blah. It's not about that. I mean, it's about efficiency, it's about profitability, it's about growth. And I think technology today can actually help and enhance your companies way, way, way faster than 10 years ago. If I look at when I started my company in 99, which is about 25 years ago, if I have to do it today again, the same company, I mean, I would probably have like 1/3 or maybe 1/5 of the people that I needed then to, and I probably have the more efficiency and at least the same efficiency and even more. And so the way that companies are perceived and you have to build companies is completely different, which also means that you have to have a very good understanding of tools that you can use inside your company to enhance your efficiency. And that can be the CRM tools, it can be sales tools, it can be automation of your accounting. I mean, there's a whole heap of tools that you use. And I also see that people not always know that these tools exist. They don't know it because it hasn't been taught at school, they don't know it and so on. So one of the things that we do a lot is helping those companies to say, hey, what you do here is great, but you can do it more efficient by using this tool or by doing it differently.
We'll finish this conversation with a quick round of questions. If you would only have three measurements, three numbers of a company, so what measurements of the financial state of a company would you use?
I would look at first, how much cash do you still have? I would look at what's your burn. And then I would also look at your EBITDA, so to have an overview of your revenue minus cost, gross margin, and stuff like that. So I would pretty much look at metrics that are financially, which doesn't mean that the other metrics are not that important. But my experience is also ultimately everything runs through cash. Everything, whatever you do in a company, if you spend money, if you have working capital, you have stock, whatever you do, ultimately it always comes through cash. And so looking at cash is very important. And so one of the things I do, for instance, you have accounting and you have all of those stuff, it's all complicated. I always ask my companies every Monday to send me an overview of the cash, purely the cash. How much cash do you have on the account? And then a week later and a week later and a week later. And if you make that into a graph, there's only two directions. Either it goes up or it goes down. Now, if it goes down, it means that you're burning cash. If it goes up, you're actually making cash. And it's very simple, but it's very effective because people don't always keep an eye on cash. And unfortunately, you go bankrupt, not because you're not profitable, but because you're not liquid. And so cash for me would be the most important one.
What is your advice to 19-year-old yourself?
If I would be 19-year-old myself, my advice would be, first of all, don't listen to everybody around you. Just do whatever you think is best for you. And I would also probably spent a lot of time trying to work with databases and how to extract data out of a database and how to work with that. Because I think in the years to come, people who will really have a good understanding of open source databases, Oracle databases, and who can extract data, but also integrate it with different applications, those are the guys that are going to be very important in companies. So that's what I would learn.
A book that changed your life, except Start, Grow, and Sell.
Yeah, no. Actually, I talk about it in the book Eat, Move, Sleep. It's a book that talks about why you need to eat decently, why you need to do sports, and why you need to sleep. It's very confronting, but it's a very interesting book. And I sometimes give it away to people that work for me that I think, maybe they should read the book because they're getting a bit too fat or something.
And the last question, what's one thing or one idea that I have not asked you today that you wish I would have asked?
Well, maybe if I ever will go to with SpaceX and to the stars or to the moon or whatever, and the answer is yes. I would very much like to do that one day.
Fantastic. Jürgen, thank you so much for this conversation.
You're welcome.
Hopefully we'll see everybody at SuperNova 2025 on the 27th and the 28th of March in Antwerp, Belgium. Thank you.
Thanks.